Well, good morning. It's a pleasure, as always, to be with you this morning. And today, particularly enthusiastic about sharing elements of my journey as evidence of how conscious dying works. You know, most of us in our North American culture are very well adapted to how we leave the limitations of the tribal and move into the egoic, the more independent life. It's very common that those of us that come from educated backgrounds would go to university, and for many, that's a way that we really kind of break those childhood ties, especially if we go to another part of the country. In my case, it was quite radical that I think 5 days after I graduated high school in 1970, I went off to Colorado Springs, Colorado, enrolled in a military school, United States Air Force Academy. That was a dramatic example of this, that I would really be quite brutally devastated during the 1 year at this military school. And for me, I think that was the beginning of a life marked by dramatic transitions. So the military school gave me one piece of evidence that, you know, even though I was really, like I say, pretty brutally devastated, I remember thinking to myself, if I survived this, nothing else will ever be so difficult. And that's more or less been true, maybe with one or two exceptions, but more or less true. It gave me this sense of inner strength. I didn't really know who I was, but it was very clear who I was not. And I was not any longer my father's son trying to be a military man like my father. So that was 1970. And then 4 years later, the next dramatic event, I had found a comfortable garden at University of Connecticut. I had met this young woman from New York City, Janet. It really appeared, and I would say even to this day, she was probably more my soulmate than any other individual woman that I've ever known. We had a remarkable relationship. We were good friends. We of course were lovers. She was very funny, very smart, very adventurous. Really, like I say, probably more like me than any woman that I would ever meet. We went through 2 pregnancies together. We were engaged to be married, which for a Catholic family or Italian family, the engagement's the big thing. You get all your big gifts, we get the china, all of that, as a celebration of our engagement. And so it was very strange. One night, quiet like this time of night, always been the portal for me, the wee hours of the morning. I was up by myself studying for an exam. I was in my last semester at university. It was totally quiet. I was sitting in an empty dorm cafeteria. And this voice tells me very clearly that I'm to break my engagement with Janet. I'm to quit the university, get rid of any of my possessions that weren't absolutely necessary. But for my car was important because I was supposed to get in my car and drive west. Now, this is sort of a hallmark of conscious dying, that often the choice that we're being asked to make is radically illogical. Nobody around us will agree or support that. There's no rational explanation for why we're making this choice, but we do it. Okay, and again, this made all the difference in my life, that I was willing to leave Janet, leave university, get in my car, and head west, not even knowing where west was. From Connecticut, there's a pretty big hunk of West in the USA. It ended up that the reason I was supposed to head west was to eventually get to San Francisco to find out about this graduate school, the California Institute of Asian Studies, later now called California Institute of Integral Studies, that it was very important that I find this place so that a year and a half later, I could have this encounter with this little woman from Burma. Her name was Rina Sarkar. And again, what conscious dying does for us is it keeps opening doors to new information, to a new type of support. If we're going to find support outside of the old paradigm, okay, it's really important that we leave our mommy and daddy so that we can find a different form of support, a different form of guidance that goes beyond the limitations of the tribal clan. So anyway, Rina Sarkar was like my first surrogate mother. She would give me a blessing. She would offer me information about the destiny of my life. It was a very remarkable experience, and that was what the voice originally, that had no name, was guiding me toward Rina. Okay, here's a person, she has a name. She's a very high-level spiritual healer and teacher, and she's telling me about my life. Well, the information she gave me at the time was very, very difficult for me to assimilate. So I spent the next, almost 10 years, 9 years, kind of just wrestling with my demons. You know, a voice had come into my mind after I received this information from Rina, say, well, if someday I'm supposed to be so good, first I need to be really bad. And that seemed like a really good idea. So I spent 9 years just going down a crazy path, lots of alcohol, lots of drugs, lots of women, until my literal crash. I remember when I was turning 33 years old, I just had this odd thought that because I had this not yet manifested relationship with Jesus, I said, well, you know, something really big happened with Jesus at 33. I think something's going to happen with me. I was in therapy at the time because I knew things were spiraling down. I was getting to a very, very dark place, and my therapist would ask me each Monday morning, is it bad enough yet? And I somehow always came up with the resolve to look out the window, and sometimes with a tear running down my cheek, especially if he put his hand on my knee. And I said, no, not yet. But anyway, October, things got really brutal. And then there's one night, the early November, I think it was November 2nd, I had this crazy automobile accident, driving drunk, driving crazy in this old Jeep. And that was the end. You know, still when I went in to see my therapist, this was a Sunday night. I always seem to have this crescendo on a Sunday night before I see my therapist Monday morning. And he asked me again if it was bad enough. And I still, just even though I was battered and bruised, and it was really amazing in this accident, I didn't die because it was a brutal accident. It was witnessed by a friend of mine who was following me in his car. And he could not believe it that I survived, let alone unscathed, didn't have a broken bone. My Jeep was totally destroyed. So even though I said no to my therapist, it wasn't bad enough yet. By the time I stumbled home to my little wreck of a house, my knees went up from under me, and I just sobbed out to the universe, I surrender. I can't do this anymore. And within a few days, I'm in treatment center, Spofford, New Hampshire. And this whole journey begins of healing. You know, it was like all of these things that were part of my karma had to be erased. Okay, so there had to be this, so at 33, in a couple of months, I had this crash where I was at ground zero. And now it was a process of starting to rebuild this broken human being. And treatment was intense. I accepted the advice of my counselor in treatment that I should go to a 6-month halfway house, even though most people like me that were educated and had opportunities didn't need to go to this place called Opportunity House. But I went, and I was the only person that I know that stayed the full 6 months. I graduated, and I remember my counselor there asking me what my plan was after graduating. It would have been right around early June, and I had no idea. I said, I have an inkling that I'm going to find something at this whole health expo that's coming to Springfield next weekend. I think I'm going to get some information there that'll help me make a decision, because I knew one thing that I knew clearly, that I was not going back. I was not going back to Connecticut. I was not going back to my family. That was over. I had to start totally new. And at this whole health expo, the first day, I remember there were several presentations that showed me that, oh, there was this pocket of spirituality and healing up in Northampton, Amherst, Massachusetts, not too far away from me. So I was pretty sure that's where I was supposed to go. So Saturday, a bunch of little bits of information, but it was Sunday morning. I sat down in this talk with this woman, Claire Ludlow. She was giving a talk on A Course in Miracles. And within a few minutes of her 1-hour presentation, I knew I was going to move to Amherst, Massachusetts and study A Course in Miracles with Claire Ludlow. So Claire was the second surrogate mother for me. She was an amazing woman. She and her husband, Ben, were really like my surrogate mother and father, and helping me to rebirth myself, helping to build something new. And so now I'm having this relationship with Jesus via Course in Miracles, very uncomfortable relationship at first. And I shared with Claire my resistance to Jesus being the teacher. And she said, well, that's not uncommon. A lot of people like you are not overtly willing to have a relationship with a Christian God or Jesus Christ himself. So she recommended that I do some like lucid dreaming, like tell myself before going to sleep, I'm going to dream. She said, let's just focus on dreaming about your biological family. And I'm like, okay. So I remember the first night I had a dream that had involved 2 of my sisters, and don't remember the details of that dream. But I think it was either the second or the third night I had this very powerful dream where where remembering the moments after my visit with Rena Surkar, walking down Dolores Boulevard in San Francisco, and just being kind of stunned, kind of like numb from the prophecy about my life. Anyway, in the dream, so I'm walking down Dolores Boulevard after my meeting with Rena, and suddenly there's this earthquake. Everything goes quiet. The birds stop chirping, and I'd like, no, I was like, holy shit. And then everything starts to, really dramatic earthquake, buildings falling, everything going crazy, fires exploding from broken gas mains and whatever, just pandemonium. A car pulls up in front of me. It's my biological family, mom and dad in the front seat, little sister between them, 2 older sisters in the back, my spot next to them. The back door flies open like, jump in, jump in, jump in. Buzzy, that was my name as a boy, Buzzy. And I'm like, no, I don't say it, I just like, no, everything was so loud. No. So the car door closes and the car speeds off. Immediately, this rope ladder falls in front of my face. And without even thinking about it, I just reach up and grab it. And it's a helicopter, lifts me off the ground, and I'm seeing this bedlam pandemonium down below me. And I look up and there's a friendly face waving to me from the body of the helicopter. Come on, come on, come on, climb up here. So I climb up the ladder and I enter the body of the helicopter, and they close the door, and it was like this thump. Everything's so quiet. And I look in the room, and it's this circle of chairs. Everybody, all the chairs are filled. All these people are looking at me. No one says a word. They just look at me with these bright eyes, like smiling, like, welcome, you're home. And it's interesting that the room was totally, the floor and the ceiling and the walls, totally like covered in like a red velvet, and it was a circular room. So I realized afterwards this was like the womb, right? being rebirthed. And so anyway, so I'm in the womb and I could hear this bum, 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 you know, very quiet. Outside was the rotor from the helicopter. And there's one chair across the way that was available. So I started walking toward that and they're like, no, 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 pointing to the cockpit. You're supposed to, your chair is up in the cockpit. So I go up and I see the pilot and he's just looking straight out ahead, flying. And he's just like nods with his head, sit down in the co-pilot seat. I'm like, really? Okay. So I sit down and put in my harness seatbelt, look out the window briefly, all the wreckage down below, fires everywhere. It's just crazy. But in the helicopter, it's really quiet, but for the thump, 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 thump of the rotor. And after a moment, he says to me, so what airport do you fly out of? And I'm like, what? Let me just say, what? And he said, what airport do you fly out of? So now I realize that he's making a reference to me as if I'm a pilot like him. And I just say, I'm not a pilot. He turns to look at me. And he says, this look in his eyes like, I'm not asking you, I'm telling you. He didn't say anything, he just looks at me. Yeah, I'm not asking you, I'm telling you, you're a pilot just like me. So this was a beginning of a time in my life that I call flying lessons, that I was getting flying lessons from Jesus. And I remember as a boy, I always knew how to fly because I was afraid of monsters and Nazi soldiers or whatever. I'd be having one type of nightmare or another. And in my dream as a boy, I knew that I could just run and go into the Superman position and start flying. And I'd fly up over the trees and over the mountains and always could escape, always beautiful. And I remember even in these dreams, one other thing that I learned, part of lucid dreaming, was that because I knew I was actually in my bed sleeping, in my dream, I could dive under the water as another way to escape from the Nazi soldiers, and I could breathe and just sit there underwater until they went away. So it was really interesting that now, many years later, I'm being taught again, because I'd forgotten. I didn't have the ability just to run and jump Superman style. So Jesus taught me how to, just like I did with the helicopter, reach up and grab like a rope ladder and just pull yourself up. Really just grabbing the air, reach up and grab the air, just pull yourself up. Do that 2 or 3 times and now I'm 15 feet off the ground. I could just sort of rotate forward and then take off. So I was learning again how to fly. And again, like I'd say, the purpose of flying was to escape the danger. As a child, my life was filled with danger. The dream represented that, the earthquake, and reaching up and grabbing, trusting, and flying above the danger of the world. So Claire and Ben, Amherst, Massachusetts, the whole experience I had there was truly a rebirthing. Amherst was truly a womb. And I knew, but I'd made a deal with myself. This was again part of the guidance to set certain markers. Okay, and a marker was going to be 3 years sober. So now 1988, November, 3 years sober. I know I'm supposed to leave the womb, but I had no idea where I was supposed to go. So I'd been really very involved with AA, went to a lot of 12-step meetings and loved speaking, loved telling my story, loved the unconditional acceptance you get there. It's a great place to practice speaking, public speaking for sure. So I remember talking after a meeting once with a couple of fellows and just saying, I know I'm supposed to move on and the next step in my life, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do, where I'm supposed to go. And one of them said, well, there's this teaching center. You might be interested. A lot of people like you that are very bright and have a background in psychology, you might be interested in becoming a CD, chemical dependency counselor. There's a new program that's been started out in Minnesota by this place called Hazelden. a very big healing center. And I just knew immediately, that's it. I'll make an application. And I remember I had to go out and visit, go through an application process there in Center City, Minnesota. They accepted me, and I remember wrapping up my life in Amherst and flying out to Minnesota in end of January 1989. And I remember arriving at this place, Center City, and they just had, they're using a converted motel on the main road, Center City, Minnesota, or actually use down the road a bit. And it was the middle of this frozen tundra. I'd never been in Minnesota. I'd never been in a winter like this before. Everything is frozen. All the lakes are frozen. Everything's white. It's really cold in Minnesota. So I remember just getting there going like, wow, this is so amazing. I never would have expected that I would be in the frozen tundra of Minnesota. Well, this left the womb for the second time. First time, leaving Janet, second time leaving Amherst, Massachusetts. And it's like, this is strange. Everything about the whole experience was strange, and I don't think I really fit in very well. Not really much of an institution guy. Like I didn't fit in the Air Force Academy. I was gone in a year. And here was this other institution. I remember this woman, Dorothy, the head of the CED counselor training program, telling me, I've heard you're teaching a class or something. You're doing something with A Course in Miracles. And I said, well, yeah, I'm facilitating a group. It's been a big part of my life now. And I'm facilitating a group. She goes, well, I don't think it's a good idea that you interfere with your studies. And I remember saying to her, Dorothy, it's like telling me not to go to my church. You wouldn't tell someone to not go to church on Sunday, would you? Anyway, she didn't like that response at all. So when the first quarter assessment happened, she said, they'd given me this, MMPI psychological inventory. And I remember Dorothy saying to me, well, it just seems to me you're a square peg trying to fit into a round hole, and I'm going to terminate your training here. So this was like in May. I remember walking down the street back to the motel. She'd given me 10 days to pack up and move out. I remember crying a little bit, which is pretty common in my early years of sobriety. I cried a lot because I was feeling all my feelings. I remember crying and going like, wow. And again, like when I was going to leave the halfway house, I knew I wasn't going to go back to Connecticut. Walking down this street on a lovely spring day in Minnesota, I remember thinking to myself, well, I know I'm not supposed to go back east. And I didn't really have any inclination at the time to go back to California, which I really had enjoyed my 10 years there. I remember just thinking, I'm supposed to stay here in the heartland, right? I didn't really know how, but as it turned out, in my Course in Miracles group, there was a woman. She was an acquisition editor. Hazelden has a very big publishing company in the specialty spirituality and healing and all of that. And she really liked my way of integrating A Course in Miracles with the 12 steps. And so she asked me if I would consider doing a book, or maybe actually be better as a booklet series, sort of 12 booklets focused on the 12 steps, integrating the wisdom of A Course in Miracles. And I'm like, that would be amazing. That'd be perfect. So she sold that idea to her upper echelon of the publishing company, and I had a contract with a little advance and everything to write this book. So I got an apartment nearby in St. Croix Falls, Wisconsin, just across the river, and started writing this book. Anyway, the main thing that was going to happen that summer wasn't really the book. It was my sister Lynn, and her suicide. I remember mom calling me crying July 4th, actually, and telling me that Lynn had hanged herself, and she was actually not completely dead. She was on life support in a coma. And as she's telling me this voice whispers in my ear, pay attention. Okay, so a short while later, I'm talking with my sister in Seattle, Washington. She's a professor out there at the time. And we were talking about coordinating flights. She'd fly through Minneapolis and we'd fly together back east to help my mom be in vigil with my little sister. And Jody, bless her soul, she says to me, would you consider doing me a favor and not coming home? And she explained to me how she had always been like the invisible one in the family, the middle child. And I had always been my mom's favorite, you know, being like her friend and surrogate therapist of sorts and stuff. So she, you know, if I was there, then I'd get all the attention. I'd be the big shot, whatever. So she wanted a chance to be something, do something in the family. So she asked me if I would not come back. So I'm like, okay, I was paying attention. So the voice asked me to stay there. And because of that, I was able to go through this really amazing process. I remember riding my bicycle every day, crying for me, for my sister, for all of the pain of our lives. You know, her suicide really was just evidence of a childhood that was quite traumatic, quite tragic. And she wasn't able to heal from it. You know, here I'm getting the opportunity now. Now I'm 3 years plus sober. I remember even thinking to myself, wow, you know, Lynn made one choice that was obvious when you're carrying that much pain. You can literally die, or in my case, you could consciously die and stay in the body. You know, dying to all that old paradigm, all that old garbage. I remember even talking to my sister once saying, you know God loves you so much, right? Because of her spiritual inclination and the work in the 12 steps. And she goes, yeah, I do know that. I do know that God loves me. And I said, so why can't you let go of the fact that your father, your dad, is not capable of loving you? In fact, he does everything he can to hurt you. And that was her problem. That was the dilemma. It's like, yeah, I know God's love, but I'm haunted by this lack of love from my own father. So I was able to write a letter to her some days later. It came to me in the night telling her, you have a choice. We were like best friends, being the two youngest. And either let go of this burden, you don't have to carry the burden for our family any longer, or let go of the burden and come back into the world, or set yourself free and just let this lifetime go. And she did. So it was pretty amazing even to hear the story about my eldest sister reading the letter to Lynn while the three of them, my two sisters and my mom, watched. And she relaxed. She'd been in a real angry coma. Her fingers clenched really hard, and her face in a grimace. And she relaxed her face and opened her hands, and she had like these stigmata marks from her fingernails going into her skin for many days. She relaxed and she let go. So she was gone. And the next year I was able to give her, I shouldn't say, I'm sorry, the next year, the next month, able to give her eulogy. And again, a remarkable experience where I had to totally surrender. I had to totally, consciously die to the idea that I had any clue what I was going to say. I remember I had tried to make notes and it was all like crazy. And I just knew it was impossible. I just had to get up there and just trust that something was going to come through me. And I remember we were sitting in the family area while people were coming into the chapel, because we hadn't lived in this town for a long time. We expected a pretty small turnout. Well, we were totally wrong. Everybody came, and they had to move the service to the main sanctuary. So that took another 15, 20 minutes to get everybody in the flowers and whatever moved. Finally, it was our time to get up there. And I remember after a piece of music that it was my time to get up and give the eulogy. And I stood up there for a moment, and I was shaking so badly. I had a little glass of water on the podium there, and I couldn't even get it to my mouth. I was shaking so badly, so I put it down. I just looked out over the audience. I remember just thinking, like, wow, this is such a remarkable opportunity, because everybody's there, all the neighbors, all the school kids, anybody from my past that and it's amazing how you can recognize somebody 20 years later. They were all there, all the teachers, all the neighbors, just everybody was there, including, of course, all my family, my uncle, and seeing him crying, seeing my dad crying. And I remember just as I watched my father crying, just feeling this thing now I call the hush of heaven come over my heart. And as I'm looking over the sea of people in the back row, there's a enthusiastic man who, he always took the form of forget his name now, Robert Conrad from Wild Wild West, a hero of mine as a kid. Jesus took that form. So here's Robert Conrad in the back going, "You're going to be great. You're going to be great. Give me the thumbs up." And I remember just relaxing and then starting to talk about how this was a day of celebration, about how Lynn's life was marked by this incredible honesty that is so rare in our world. And this is why, she had to do what she did, because she was honestly experiencing this incredible pain, the pain of life that most people numb over with alcohol and drugs. And she tried that plenty. She was a drug addict and alcoholic and all that as well. And she tried many times going through treatment and many times, failing. In fact, she hung herself on the eve of being let out of a 3-month treatment center focused on mental illness and drug addiction. It's like the world was too much. And so this again was something that's so, to me, so important, that we learn to sort of consciously die to all the bullshit that says, oh, no, this is how you have a happy life. It doesn't work. What the conditioning of the world teaches us does not work. Those of us that are honest enough to see that it doesn't really work, okay, we have to take another path, which is either exit the planet or consciously die to the bullshit and have something real. Okay, so I remember thinking to myself after that eulogy, and people were coming up to me, and I have no idea what I said really, but because it wasn't me. It was like I was being used to give this amazing message to this room full of 200 or so people, and going through the receiving line, they're all like looking at me like, wow, that was so beautiful. Like they don't even know what I said, but it was so incredibly beautiful. Everybody was really shook by this message. And, I kind of knew then at 38 that, wow, there's an ability I have because I'm so able to surrender, to let go and be used as a mouthpiece, that I'll be really good at this. And so I remember even kind of thinking for the first time that what Rena had told me way back when I was 22 about my destiny to be this great spiritual teacher, that's how it works. By becoming nothing, by becoming empty, by becoming useful, any of us can do great things. And I remember thinking to myself later in my life that this would be the secret that I would share, that our training for greatness is really this process of one devastation after another, where we become nothing, but our willingness to serve makes the teaching that would come through us great, because we're not running interference patterns like, oh, look at me, like I'm doing this for money or doing this for fame or whatever. So there was a few more devastations yet to come. I had to go to India at the age of 40, really stupid idea, but that was something that was part of the program, that I would be on my deathbed in India, just utterly devastated. I mean, the trip to India, if I had any pride or arrogance left before I went to India, it was utterly gone. when I came back from India, I mean, obviously I survived, but I was on deathbed for 3 days with 107 fever. I mean, my brain has been so badly fried by a number of these experiences, near-death experiences, that there's nothing left up there. So that makes me a pretty happy person, Forrest Gump kind of happy. Yep, stupid is as stupid does. Ask Kati, my wife here in Ecuador, she'd agree with that. There's a great line from A Course in Miracles says, would you rather be right? Like, clever people, they always want to be right, or happy. Stupid people prefer to be happy. So yeah, she's always right, and I'm always happy. So it works out pretty well. So this whole thing, India was just to wipe me totally down to nothing. I crawled back to Minnesota and got married to my second wife, Suzanne. And just all I wanted to do, like Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, was just never leave my backyard. In fact, she had a pretty nice backyard, about a 1/4-acre lot, which I turned into a really amazing garden over 10 years. This was my devotion, was plant a garden, build a garden, just be about the earth. This was like my baby steps into this new earth that literally was about the earth, about gardening, about plants, about simplicity, about living a very, very simple life. I knew I never wanted to travel ever again, never wanted to leave USA. I never wanted to really leave Minnesota. But of course, there was one more devastation that would be leave the womb number 3. And I had to leave. It wasn't difficult for me to leave my marriage, but it was really difficult to leave my heart and soul that I had put into this garden, and my little doggie and my stepdaughter. And it was difficult and necessary to leave in 2005. And actually, I knew I needed to leave USA, not because I wanted to travel, but just that USA was not my home any longer. I didn't feel that this was my home. I needed to find another sweeter, kinder place. And so here I am in Ecuador. Just the last story that I would tell would be, as far as consciously dying to something, was when I first met Kati. We had met through a dating site online, and we met in this Central Park in Cuenca. And when we met, I said, well, you look very nice, but you're not my type. And so you can't really imagine a personal relationship together. But she kind of persisted and said, well, maybe I could work. Maybe. And I was just in the process of renting this country home. And I said, well, if you got skills, like you can help me. And turns out she knows plumbing, electricity, painting. I mean, she's very handy, as most Ecuadorian people are, but Kati's kind of particularly adept at these masculine things. And so she was, for 3 months, my handyman. She showed up for work every morning at 8 o'clock, and just a really, really solid person. But again, she wasn't my type. But this is, again, part of this conscious dying. Like, maybe a woman who was not my type would be a better partner for me, a friend for me, not just sort of the antithesis of my first 2 wives. And just remember when she asked me this amazing question one day. She said, I'm 37, I'm a virgin, I have no prospects for marriage or having a child. And in my culture, in my family, a woman that doesn't marry and doesn't have a child ends up her whole life just as a servant to the parents. And I've seen this on both her mother's and father's side. This is true. So she just asked me if I would consider, sort of no strings attached, if I'd help her make a baby. And remember, this is the this is the last of a series of times when the voice said to me, pay attention. Like, this would be for me an opportunity that I never could have realized on my own, obviously. But my vision of my retirement down here had nothing to do with a child, had nothing to do with a third wife. But of course, like always, I was wrong. This was the perfect thing. I just couldn't see it because of I hadn't died yet enough to welcome being a husband and a father in a way that I never could have been ever before. Because of my damaged childhood, it never would have occurred to me that I could have had a happy relationship with a woman or that I could have been a good father. Well, 5 years with my daughter has proven to me that I'm a great dad, that I have the capacity now to be a great father, and I think I'm a pretty good husband. So here we are in this story that I never ever could have orchestrated on my own. This is kind of the key to conscious dying, is that there'll be opportunity after opportunity after opportunity to say no to the old so that something new could arise. So it's a very vital lesson, and we'll talk about it more, but I know I've talked plenty more today, a longer session than normal. Thank you for listening. I appreciate you. I love you so much for giving me the opportunity to fulfill my own personal destiny.